Well, it's a Mailbag Thursday, and you're wondering about where Nebraska's NIL stands compared to others. We'll discuss it coming up.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by the College Football Playoff. It's here. You don't want to miss a moment of the action. The playoff is presented by Allstate, and it begins with 4 first-round games. You can find them Friday night and Saturday all day on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max.
Okay, welcome in. This is the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone in Omaha is with me. We are doing a mailbag today, as you mentioned in the open. Connor, thank you to all of our listeners and viewers for the questions you sent in. We've got some thought-provoking questions today, some deeper questions, and then, one about our favorite baseball team. So we'll get to that later.
Amazing.
In this episode. But we start with Thomas. Thomas on email asks us, where do you believe Nebraska's NIL money ranks among the other Power 4 programs? Are we, Nebraska, top 20? How realistic is it for us to be a consistent playoff contender when there are programs with seemingly endless NIL dollars? Do we believe that you can actually buy playoff teams, or does player development and coaching mean more?
I do not believe that you could buy a playoff team. I still think that you need to create a culture and all of the things that always have mattered in college football, and depth and all that stuff. And then a good NIL operation could put you over the top. It can help you fix holes that you feel like you need to plug. Let's say you feel like you have all the pieces and the schedule might line up and you need a quarterback, and you could go, throw a couple $1 million at the best quarterback in the transfer portal or something like that. Like, that's where NIL is such a big deal. And it's a big deal for roster building in general and to attract players and all that stuff. But all the other stuff still matters, like facilities and what the coaching staff is like all the regular stuff still matters. So I don't think it's just NIL. As far as where Nebraska sits, like everything that I have ever, sort of heard about how Nebraska's operation is I think it sits honestly pretty close to where it recruits in the country, like top 20, right. Top 25-ish sort of level in terms of what they can offer players.
Yeah, so the NCAA recently put out some estimates that did not place Nebraska in the top 20. So to get into the top 10, according to this, and I don't think this is like the end-all, be-all, because a lot of this really has to do with how liquid your assets are. Like, do you have a donor base that you can go to and get, right, say, $2 million if there's a quarterback on the market? It's not necessarily about how much did you spend in the last year on your roster, and that's important, but it's more about how much can you spend if needed next year on your roster. And so Nebraska's in a position with 1890, its collective, where you have a significant portion of the funding for 1890, including ownership of the collective with the Pede family in Lincoln. So that can be viewed as a big plus because they know where to go, the organizers of the collective, if a need arises to essentially buy a player, buy a recruit, retain a player. But also you want to be able to tap the entire fan base. So you don't want to get too dependent necessarily on one source of revenue, even if that source of revenue is largely driving your collective. I think if you went around the country and you looked at various situations at Power 4 programs, you would find some that were structured similar to Nebraska, where you had a funding source that was doing a lot, a significant amount. in terms of percentage for your collective. And then you would have others that were spread around, where there's a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. Nebraska needs to aim to have both of those things in play. So the recent NCAA estimates said to get in the top 10, you had to spend about $15 million annually. And the top teams were Texas, Ohio State, LSU, Georgia, Texas A&M, Michigan, Alabama, Florida, and Clemson. There are zero surprises in that top 10 when you go through that list. Maybe Clemson at the end, but the first 9 are like a who's who of spending money in college sports.
Absolutely, 100%. And I don't think Nebraska's that far off of that range. So that's, and you can win plenty of games that way. Like I don't think Nebraska is just out here like getting smoked in NIL, and that's why like
absolutely
people do that all the time. And I think coaches will often use it as an excuse too. Is like, yeah, we got to have better players, and we got to have the fan base, and we got to have the donors really step up. Like I think Nebraska is positioned. They're certainly positioned to win a hell of a lot more games than they have over the last several years. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So notice in the question about the playoff and buying a team, of those 10 teams that I mentioned, there's 4 who are in the playoff: Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, and Clemson. So you have 8 teams that found a way to get in the playoff without being in the top 10. To get into the top 20, it roughly comes in around about $9 million in your annual NIL budget. And I think Nebraska is right in that range and can strive to move higher. And this list, it fluctuates year to year. A couple years ago, you might have gotten the top 20 by spending $2 to $3 million on your roster through NIL. And then last year, maybe it was $5 to $7 million, and now it's $9 million. Well, where do you think it's going in 2025 and 2026? It's only going up. And then the question is, who can sustain that? Because I think there are real concerns about this whole process just being unsustainable for some of the programs that are striving to get to the top. Not necessarily those schools that I listed there: Texas, Ohio State, LSU, Georgia, Texas A&M, Michigan, Alabama. Like, they're going to always have money.
Yeah. I hope that too, and I think I mentioned this a couple days ago, but I also hope that players sort of have a realization that it's, the best money offer is not always the best offer as well. And maybe that's when some of this stuff slows down, because you're just seeing teams like, the bids are often silent. And then, we're talking about guys who haven't played much football before getting offered, insane amounts of money. We're seeing that out there, and then good players obviously as well. It's just kind of all over the board. Totally not sustainable.
You look at the pro game and how many players accept contracts through free agency that isn't the highest offer.
You're right.
Usually
5 times every offseason.
Yeah. I mean, it happens, but most
I mean the highest contract ever happens every offseason.
Oh, the highest contract ever. I'm saying how often? Yeah, they set a new record, which speaks to what's going on in college, where you continue to have the bar raised. But usually, when there's a bidding war, or a player has multiple options on the table, they go to the program, or the organization, the professional organization that's offering the most money. You see exceptions to that, and somebody gives a hometown discount, maybe to re-sign with the Royals or something like that. But they're going to follow the money, and that's generally the way it's going to work in college athletics too.
Yep, no doubt.
All right, question from John on email. John says, I have a suspicion that many teams will use a strategy different than what Matt Rhule is doing on reaching the 105 player roster limit. Instead of guiding players to leave the program, and this is some of what Matt Rhule's doing as he wants his players to land in the right spots, other teams will aggressively throw money out to quality transfers and pay to keep their teams together, then go into the spring way over the limit. Then they will cut players after the spring and balance the books between NIL and rev share to keep as many as possible. So the alternative, John says, is that 80% of all the Power 4 transfers will not find another spot on a P4 roster. There are already 2,000 portal entries and negative 2,000 roster spots. What am I missing? The math confuses me.
Yeah. To be fair, I do think Matt Rhule like they're not going to be set on the 105 January 1st,
No.
they won't be close to that. And so they're trying to do some heavy lifting right now, but honestly, I don't know, like a lot of the attrition that Nebraska has seen so far is not necessarily forced attrition. Just my read on the situation. So, yeah, like there's a little bit of it, but they're not going to have stuff set anytime soon. So they're going to take their time with it and do that when spring ball rolls around as well. And the math, as far as the portal, I mean, no doubt about it, definitely doesn't make.
There's not enough spots. There's not enough spots. You're going to have a lot of Power 4 players who are not in the Power 4, who are not even in the FBS, who have to go down to the FCS and lower levels. That's just the way it's going to be. I think there are plenty of players on the Nebraska roster who know they're not going to be on the 105, but haven't gone in the portal yet because they want to be part of the bowl experience. And I'm talking more about walk-ons, about players who are like in that 120 to 1, or we're in that like 120 to 150 range. So they're not necessarily believing that they're going to that, like for Daniel Kalen, there was benefit for him to go into the portal in December because he was worthy of a Power 4 spot. If he'd waited until January and said, I want to experience the bowl game with Nebraska, he may not have been able to get that spot at Virginia. They may have filled it already and had 2 quarterbacks ready to go for the spring semester. So understandably, he went into the portal in December. But there's a whole group of players who won't be a part of the Nebraska roster in 25 who I think will wait until after the bowl game or maybe even after the spring to go into the portal just so they can be a part of the program for, as long as is available.
Yeah, definitely makes a lot of sense for a quarterback. I mean, we saw the Penn State backup for Beulah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was met with the same decision. Like, all right, is it a college football playoff game, or I got to figure out what's best for me here because the spots are going fast, and I got to get one of these spots. If I want to be a starter somewhere across the country. So the math definitely doesn't make sense. There's going to be a lot of people who are sitting around and they're not playing college football next year. And to be fair, like I think with Nebraska's roster, one of the hangups that people had was like, all right, well, they have 150 players on their roster. There's going to be a portion of Nebraska's roster that just won't enter the transfer portal at all, and they won't play college football next year. They'll just be gone, So it's not like they're going to have to find spots elsewhere. They'll just, go back home or be regular students. And so that's going to happen a lot around the country as well.
Yeah, that's the situation that's been created by the settlement. So, got to live with it. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's take a break here. We'll come back. Still plenty more questions to get to as we continue on the Thursday mailbag show on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. All right, folks, that time of the year, the college football playoff is here. The expanded college football playoff is finally here. I cannot wait for the games this weekend. We got a 12-team format, bigger, better than ever, colder temperatures around much of the college football playoff this weekend. I'm fired up. And TNT sports coverage of the CFP begins on Friday with the college football playoff. Well, on Saturday, I suppose, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 10 a.m. Central. That leads into the first matchup, SMU against Penn State, starting at 11 Central. And then you got Clemson in Texas at 3 Central. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer and Mitch Sherman with you. Got through a couple bigger, kind of convoluted questions there, but important questions to answer. I've spent much of my radio show for the last several days just like thinking out loud. What's going to happen? What are we going to do? We have a problem in college football, and who's going to fix it?
And you'll probably be talking about that stuff for all of the months ahead when it comes to football chatter.
Going to drive ourselves crazy, I think. Let's go back to the questions here. Michael emails in to lockedonneb@gmail.com. Speaking of the CFP, what impact does the CFP first round home games have on a university revenue? So financially, how much money does a home game produce with ticket sales and concessions?
Yeah, so I looked into this, And all of the ticket revenue from these first round games that we're going to see on Friday and Saturday, it goes to the college football playoff. And then the college football playoff will guarantee payouts. And the more you win, the more money you get. Every team in the playoff is guaranteed $4 million payout. It increases as you win in advance. So financially beneficial to go and make the playoff. And then the teams and the leagues can decide what to do with that. If it's a deal where, like some leagues do with bowl revenue, they share it amongst the teams that are not playing in the playoff or in a bowl game, then they can choose to do that. If you're Notre Dame, you're just going to get rich by continuing to win games Friday and beyond. So
if you're Notre
that's
Dame,
the ticket.
The playoff. I mean, you're not getting as big of a payout as Big Ten and SEC teams are. From their
they have a pretty good contract with NBC.
They do, but it's not as good.
It's not Big Ten.
Yeah. And so making the playoffs for any team in the Big 12, Notre Dame, or anybody in the ACC, super important. Anybody in the G5, Boise, I mean, they're loving this right now.
Right. So depending on the stadium, you can assume that's about 5 to 10 million. Anyway, that money goes to the CFP. But the schools, money from concessions and parking, that is designed to cover the cost of staging and hosting the game. It's not cheap to hire everyone that you need to put on a college football playoff game on short notice, especially. So maybe Penn State, because of the size of its stadium, although that is going to require more people to work, possibly Penn State or Ohio State with a huge stadium makes more money on parking and concessions than it costs to put on the game. Then they turn a profit there, and they can keep that money. So that's about how that works.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to our next question. This is an interesting. This is like a concept question from Nate. He says that he has now changed the time. It's 2010. Are you both more disappointed that Bubba Starling decommitted from Nebraska, or more excited that he went to your Kansas City Royals? Aside from what you know about his career arc now, what were your feelings in that moment?
Feelings. What were your feelings? I'll let you start. Since you were such a young child.
This was 2010, right? Was it 2011? Yeah, it's 2011.
It was 11.
So yeah, like I am at this point, like I am just starting to attend the University of Nebraska, and so and the Royals had been bad my entire life.
So Bubba was going to be your classmate. Yeah.
Yeah. Never a sniff of, me and Bubba are like the same age. So, never a sniff of the playoffs or anything like that. Obviously he was pretty excited about his baseball career, but I think I was definitely more excited about him being the quarterback at Nebraska. And then wasn't there conversation that he would play baseball at Nebraska too?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that I was pretty much, I was like obsessed with that idea at the time, because there was a couple people who came through, and I was very much desperate for Nebraska baseball to get back to their glory days, which were only, 6 years ago at that point. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I was pretty fired up when he showed up for that fan day for sure.
Yeah, he was in camp. He was in camp with Bo Pelini. I mean, this was a different time in contract negotiations for draft picks, and he was the 5th pick in the draft. So he came to preseason camp for a few days, and then the deadline, I think it was August 15th, where you had to sign, or you were basically giving it up for 3 years. And he signed, as we know. I don't know that there was ever really a whole lot of doubt about whether Bubba Starling was going to pass on the 5, 6, 7 million that he got as a first round pick, and go play quarterback at Nebraska. I mean, he was a raw football player. So I saw Bubba play baseball quite a bit in that spring of 2011. I was working at ESPN, first year at ESPN. So this was kind of like my cash cow a little bit, because I was writing about Bubba, and this was a story of national interest, MLB interest, college football interest. Nebraska's new to the Big Ten, coming off 2 consecutive appearances in the Big 12 championship game. So people were paying attention, and he was one of the top football recruits in the country. And I had a big piece right around the draft that came out about, were the Royals going to take him? would he sign? Would he go to Nebraska? Could he play 2 sports in college? What kind of a prospect was he? It was great for me. I didn't care. If he went to the Royals, fantastic. Then I could put on my Royals hat and say I knew that guy. If he went to Nebraska, I was looking forward to seeing him play at Memorial Stadium too. So, just for reference on whether Bubba Starling made the right choice, he played part of 9 seasons in the minors and parts of 2 in the majors. He hit .204. Here comes the baseball nerd. With an OPS of 544 and 261 plate appearances, he had 17 RBIs and a 6.3 to 1 strikeout to walk ratio.
Not good.
That is not good.
He was a career minor leaguer until the Royals finally brought him up when they were just horrendous.
They had to see what would happen.
Decade. Yeah, right. And then I think DFA'd him or whatever it was, and that was it. Like he just stopped. That he's not playing.
Oh no. Did you ever meet him? And come cross paths with him and not in your Storm Chasers responsibilities?
No, but I watched him play in Omaha a lot, but never met him.
Yeah, I went to see him when he was playing in AAA, and it had been 7, 8, 9 years or so since we had crossed paths the first time. At that point he was, the first time we crossed paths, he was 18, and he's just this young, fresh, amazing athlete. I mean, just the world at his fingertips. He could play in the NFL, he could play in MLB and be an all-star, probably could have played in the NBA. I mean, the stories about this guy were legendary. And then when I reconnected with him, and he had been languishing through the minors and climbed his way up, clawed his way to AAA, and was decent in AAA. And there was a period of time where it was like, oh, maybe he's finally figured it out. Like he's a real prospect. I went and sat down with him in the Chasers clubhouse, and I mean, I enjoyed talking to him. He remembered me, and wow, it was like a lifetime had passed just to see how much, that all of the naivety was gone. The farm boy, the small town kid who was, could do whatever he wanted. That was all gone. The reality of professional sports had set in. It was very interesting to see.
Every time they show that, they cut to that montage in Moneyball of Billy Beane when he's like, he's the scouts are in his living room, and he's and he's like, they're telling him how what he should do and all the things that he's gonna do, and then they cut to him like, he's playing in the minor leagues and stuff like that. He's just slowly, gradually losing his confidence. Every time they do that, I every time I watch that movie, I think of Bubba Starling, because I just think the story applies to him so much, and it's. There's nothing that you could do about it. Like there's no guarantee that he would have worked out at Nebraska, or there's no guarantee he would have worked out in a football career either.
I don't know what happened.
It just happens that way. So, unfortunately, he got caught up on the bad side of it.
Could he have beaten out Taylor Martinez? Could he have been a better quarterback?
I don't know.
Than Tommy Armstrong? I don't know.
Like it worked out okay for Nebraska.
It worked out okay for Bubba. I mean, despite not having a great stardom in pro sports, he got paid, so I'm sure he's doing fine. And we as Royals fans are just thankful that Bobby Witt Jr. was not the second coming of Bubba Starling.
That's right. Yeah. That's the only thing that we have to say about that. All right, we still have a couple more questions to get to as we finish out a Thursday edition here of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. All right, get ready to tackle all of the NFL action this weekend with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. I'll tell you a little bit about the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It gives you everything you need. You can place live bets on the NFL, futures on the NFL, or, of course, look ahead to this weekend's game. You could, like I said, the live bets, you get the hunch right in the middle of the game. You think the bets close when the games start at noon on Sunday? No, it's 2:00. It's the witching hour, and you could pop out the FanDuel Sportsbook app and get it going your way. And for more incentive, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
And I would like to tell you about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with more than 5 million active members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is you pick more or less on a 2 to 6 player stat projection, and then you watch the winnings roll in. Right now, you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. It is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So you stay and play even if one of your players goes down with injuries. Here's how it works. Pick a player, look him up. Maybe it's Jamar Chase. Number set at 102 yards. You pick more or less. Pick Jared Goff. Passing yardage number set at 247. It's that easy. Pick more or less. Set your lineup, make your picks, sit back, and watch yourself win. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $50 instantly when you play. That's Locked On College on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Okay, back with you on this Thursday of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman. Connor Happer is here with me as always. Friday on the pod, Connor, we're going to break down the college football playoff. Continue to keep our eyes on the transfer portal. I saw some Nebraska coaches posting some cryptic messages on Wednesday night. So if that hasn't already come across your timeline beyond the time that we taped this episode, maybe we'll know more by the time we get ready to record on Friday. We'll also have results from Louisville, where I will be stationed tonight for the NCAA volleyball national semifinals. So Pitt versus Louisville in the ACC matinee, and then Nebraska Penn State in prime time, 8:00 Central Time tonight for a spot in the national championship match. So we'll have some reaction to that as well on Friday. All right, back to the mailbag questions from Dylan on DM. On DM. Dylan, is that you? He says, do you think players are more likely to play in bowl games more likely now than in the past with NIL because they've been getting paid all year? You still have the chance of losing millions because of injury. So he's asking if players are more likely to play in the bowl games instead of opting out because they have NIL. And you know, you can offer what you think. I have a thought.
Yeah. So basically the idea is, all right, they'll
be incentivized to play because they're getting paid.
They're more professional athletes. I mean, do we know that they don't get paid if they don't play the bowl game?
That's the thing. Like, what does their contract say? And that's what it's going to come down to. Like, if you have a contract that says you've got to play in the bowl game or you have to play in all the games in order to keep getting paid, they're probably going to play. If it doesn't say anything about it, they're more likely to opt out.
Totally. Yeah. So, no, I guess would be my answer to that question. And the threat still stands for guys who, have an NFL future, right? They're not going to play, especially if it's not the playoff. I mean, they're probably not going to play in those bowl games if they feel like they're going to go to the draft. Nebraska's got a unique situation this year where they have a few draft guys who have futures to worry about, but they have a lot of guys who are kind of on the borderline of like, hey, maybe I'll make it into a camp or I'll make it into a practice squad or something like that. And also, I've been playing at Nebraska for 42 years and we've never gone to a bowl game and I'd really like to play in it.
Yeah. Hello, Bryce Benhart and Ty Robinson.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ty Robinson's going to get drafted. I think Deshaun Singleton has a chance to get drafted for sure, depending on how things go for him in the pre-draft routine. Ben Scott, Bryce Benhart, they can for sure get looks. Isaac Gifford can get a look, but it's not going to be one of those years where like Nebraska's filled up with draft picks. There haven't been many of those in recent years. Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting here when you talk about NIL and opt-outs in bowl games is it's about NIL contracts and players have all the leverage, as Matt Rhule has told us in these contracts getting drawn up. So it's unlikely, or probably less likely than what the teams, the collectives would prefer. It's less likely to have stipulations in there, like you must play in X number of games in order to get paid. Like these contracts are going to read in a way that are player friendly, because you're not just trying to get the best value for the player when you put these contracts on the table. You're trying to get them to sign it and sign with your school, as opposed to the rival across the state line that is giving you everything up front. So it's a tough spot for colleges and their collectives.
It's totally key point right there. All this stuff is, we can't go from this like super duper, we're going to allow all this freedom and player movement and like super player friendly time, to all of a sudden put the restrictions, hard cap back on. Like, sorry,
you've opened the box.
The portal door is open.
Get what they want. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, one more question.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, we'll finish it up with this from Scott on DM. He says, seems like J.D. Spielman and DeMornay Pearsonell had the same body types. We're going back in Nebraska history, and we're both excellent at punt returns. Do we not have anyone on the roster who makes you hold your breath for a big punt return? Is there just more speed in the game today, or is it X's and O's? Seems like all we do now is fair catch to minimize risk.
I think Nebraska thinks that Ja'Cory Barney could be a threat back there.
Yeah,
I think Ja'Cory Barney could be a threat back there.
Do you want to put him on punt returns? I mean, he's on kickoff returns, and he's such a valuable piece of the offense. That hasn't stopped Nebraska in the past. Pearsonell was a big piece of the offense.
Yeah, I mean,
Spielman.
I would definitely take it over the alternative of what they have been doing, which is, we could put some other non-explosive wide receiver out there and have him sit back and fair catch it and be fine. Like, Nebraska needs to have a threat. So I agree with that point. Do they have him? Do they have that person? I think they do. But I guess they thought about it and they said, like, hey, well, let's do one step at a time here.
Yeah, first you have to secure the punts. Do you want to put Jalen Lloyd back on punt returns? Do you want to put Ja'Cory Barney back there? There are others on the roster, defensive backs, who have that body type. And I mean, you're talking about quick twitch guys. You're talking about guys who have the ability first to secure the ball, but then to put the kind of moves on coverage, players in coverage that allow them to get in open space and run a long way. Nebraska averaged 4.87 yards per punt return. Wait a second. Yes, 4.87 yards per punt return. They averaged 6 yards per game in punt returns in this 2024 season. That's 109th in the country. Looking for a Big Ten team that was worse than that, and I'm finding no one. So they have to get better. And I don't think that's entirely about the job that the punt returners did. It's not all about Isaiah Garcia Castaneda or whoever else has been back there returning kicks. It's about the scheme too. It's about getting Nebraska to a place where it does things right in punt return, like with 11 players in punt block. So they're not blocking a ton of punts. They're not returning punts. Like, get that better. Get that part of the game better. There's been a lot of crying about special teams over these last few months, when people saw Nebraska missing kicks left and right early in the season and then getting kicks blocked left and right early in the season. I would argue that a more consistent problem with Nebraska's special teams has been the inability just to create an 11-player scheme that allows you to have a chance to return kicks and shut teams down on their returns on the other side.
For like a decade, I guess since Pearsonell left, that's kind of how it's been. So, all right, appreciate you all sending in those mailbag questions. Be on the lookout for Mitch's coverage from Louisville and from Columbus, which is going to be awesome. And we'll be here holding the fort down as well. We'll be back with you on Friday. Appreciate you making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Craig puts the Big Ten first. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.